Welcome, dear listeners, to the WIP show brought to you by Keemiya Creatives, where we dive deep into the world of writing and creativity. I'm Namrata, your host and the founder of Keemiya Creatives. WIP, you might ask, well, it stands for Writing in Progress, and that's exactly what we are all about here. Each week, we bring you inspiring conversations with talented writers, delving into their journeys, their challenges, and the stories behind their stories. From seasoned authors to aspiring wordsmiths, we explore the nooks and crannies of the writing process. Whether it is overcoming writer's block, finding inspiration in the unlikeliest of places, or simply navigating the wild, wonderful world of words, we are here for it all. So grab your favorite writing mug, settle into your coziest writing nook, and join us as we celebrate the beauty and chaos of the writing journey. Our guest today is the brilliant Shatrujeet Nath. Shatrujeet Nath is the creator of the runaway national best-selling series Vikramaditya Veergatha and the alternative mythology series Warlord of Ayodhya. Described as the new face of Indian mythology by DNA, he writes for movies and web shows as well. Welcome, Shatrujeet, and thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you so much, Namrata, for having me over. It's a pleasure. I mean, I've known you over a period of a few years. You've been kind enough to read and review my books and say nice things about my books. So thank you for that. Thank you for reading. Thank you for. I keep telling people, it's not just good enough to read. It's so important to read, review, rate, recommend, and I think that's really what platforms like you have been doing. So yeah, thank you so much for all the help
It's
and
a
support that you
pleasure.
give.
As I always say, you are one of the few Indian writers whose journey I've been following since their debut. And it's actually a treat to read your work, to talk to you, and to listen to what has gone behind making those stories what they were. So talking about your debut, our first question is actually that you made your debut with the Karachi Deception, which was regarded as one of India's finest thrillers when it came out, before transitioning to mythology with the Vikramaditya series and now, of course, the Warlord of Ayodhya. So can we expect you to return to write these thrillers in the future?
Yes, most certainly. In fact, I am. I won't say that I am tiring of writing mythology, but I definitely need a break from mythology because yeah, I think I've done Vikramaditya Veergatha. The four books were written over a span of about 7 years,
Yeah.
and now Warlord of Ayodhya probably over a span of about 3 to 4 years. So that's a long part of my life dedicated to writing mythology. And I think I really need a break. I need a break not only from mythology, but I also need a break from writing a series. So I definitely want to do standalone books. I definitely am looking forward to going back and writing thrillers. And yeah, thrillers are contemporary thrillers are very exciting. And yeah, if all goes well, once I'm done with the third Warlord of Ayodhya book, I definitely will go back to writing. I don't know what it's going to be. Is it going to be a historical thriller? Is it going to be a contemporary thriller? So I'm kind of exploring two or three options. I don't know which one will happen first, but yeah, definitely yes. I do want to write more contemporary modern stuff. I must say that I'm doing that in my non-book space,
Yeah.
which is writing and the for the
Web
for
shows.
the screen. We'll talk about that later. So in that sense, my kicks of writing a thriller I'm doing that, but not for a book. I guess I do intend coming back and hopefully writing something which will be fun to write and hopefully even more fun to read.
Well, I'm so excited to hear that because I have another YouTube show where I actually analyze books which are adapted to screen, and in that I have a
Okay.
segment where I just say that books we would love to see on screen, and Karachi Deception has been on the list for the longest because that you can actually visualize. The writing is so beautiful that even before it can actually get adapted or it can be made, you can see that happening in front of your eyes, and that's what makes it such a fun read. But I have seen this in your mythological writing also. So it is very interesting to note that you've been a journalist and an assistant editor for so many leading newspapers, and then in many ways writing has always been a part of your life, in different forms. Like even right now you said that non-book and book related writing. So was it always the idea to have writing as a core for everything that you tried doing across the different spaces or the mediums that you've been working on?
No, no, no. Actually, no. Uh, am I audible?
Yes, yes, you're audible.
Am I clearly audible?
Yes, yes.
Or is there a lag?
No, I can hear you clearly. You
Uh,
just froze for a second, but
okay,
now
okay,
it's clear.
great.
Yeah.
So, no, writing. Okay, I think you've also kind of frozen, so I can't see you, but it's okay. I think I'll just continue talking. Uh, hopefully we'll be fine. So, yeah, to answer your question, no, writing was never really something that I kind of set out to do in life. It's something that I discovered more by chance, as you know, like unlike a lot of authors who started writing at the age of maybe 8 or 10 or 12. That was not the case with me. I was not. I actually disliked writing, and my mother used to kind of try and get me to write, and I used to really hate it. But I think it's only when I got into college that I started writing, and I think it was by pure chance that I actually started in sales and marketing. And what was interesting was that the this is back in the early 90s in Cochin. Uh, the office I used to work for, the office shared the same floor with an advertising agency. And the ad agency, so the landing used to be the common area where people would come out and smoke. So I happened to make friends with a couple of people from the ad agency, and that's how I got to know that you actually the advertising business needs writers, copywriters, and I think over a period of time I kind of I got into advertising, and that's really for the first time that I started writing and I started getting paid for my writing.
Right.
I was in advertising for about 3.5 years or so, but I kind of tired of advertising, and then I got into journalism. And
Wow.
journalism is really where I started enjoying my writing. I started writing, longer pieces, 1,000 words, 2,000 words, 4,000 words, and that's really when I started enjoying my writing. Discovered the joy of writing, discovered the joy of telling stories. Interesting ways of telling stories, and looking for stories, and figuring out where stories are, where you don't see any stories, and things like that. So journalism, it's something that I stuck for a little over a decade, and that's really where I kind of embraced the idea of writing. As I said, it started paying me well, and then I had enough of journalism. I think by around 2009, and that's when I quit and started writing fiction. And I've been doing that for the last whatever 14 years or so. So yeah, 14, 15 years now. I've been writing fiction, written 7 books, working for shows, movies. Yeah, so I can't complain. I'm happy. But yes, it came late to me. It didn't come naturally, but I'm happy it did come.
No, I must appreciate your honesty in saying that you didn't enjoy writing as a child. And, interestingly, if you look at this trend, some of the most loved writers, at least in our country, in India, are people who have come to writing not through writing. Like they didn't study literature, they didn't study MFA in creative writing, but they are loved because what I believe is their stories come straight from the heart. And as we have always known that India is a very emotional driven market, very high on emotions, and that's
I'm
what
sorry, I have
connects.
missed you.
Are you able to hear me now?
Now I can. Now I can.
Yeah.
Yes.
So I think that's what perhaps works for all the writers because the stories are straight from the heart. So talking about your latest series, Warlord of Ayodhya, it delves into
Right.
alternative mythology. So can you take us through what alternative mythology means to you and how you approach it in your storytelling?
So actually, alternative mythology is actually a derivative term, which is, we have history and you have alternative history. So history is where you look at, say, you look at the story of what happened to India during the independence movement, colonialism and all of that, and then you turn around and when you've got alternative history, it basically takes a story and it takes a departure from known history and says that things had happened a little differently. How would history have panned out? So, for example, one way of looking at alternative history is what if India had not achieved independence in 1947? And what if India was still continued to be a colony of the British Empire? Okay. So that is an alternative history, a different way of looking at how the last 75 years of history of this subcontinent has panned out uh, under British rule. So alternative history is basically it looks at history and says it changes one element in history and looks at what would have been the impact of that moment in history. So I do the same thing in some ways with alternative mythology because if one takes, the Vikramaditya Veergatha series, it's all about, as you've read it, and for those who, just in a nutshell, the whole story is about the halahal, which came out during the Samudra Manthan, and it was this poison that started destroying all creation, and the devas and asuras take this to Shiva, and Shiva drinks this poison and that's when Parvati kind of holds his throat and he becomes Neelkant because she doesn't want him to swallow it and because it's so destructive. And that's how Shiva saves the universe. So that is the mythology. The alternative mythology is okay, what if all the halahal had not been destroyed? What if some amount of that halahal still remained? What would happen? How would that impact our mythological telling of stories? That's really what happened with the Vikramaditya Veergatha series. That was the starting point, which led to how this Asura steals a little bit of the halal. Shiva gets to know about it, and he takes it and keeps it with himself. But now both the Devas and the Asuras want it, and now Shiva doesn't have a choice. So he can't give it to the Devas, he can't give it to the Asuras. So he gives it to the balancing force between the Devas and the Asuras, which is mankind, and he gives it to Vikramaditya. And he says you have to protect this halal and make sure that it doesn't fall in the hands of the Devas and the Asuras. And the whole story is about what the Devas and Asuras do to try and get this halal from Vikramaditya. That's the whole story. I mean, it's so simply put, but it's across 4 books and some 4 lakh, almost 5 lakh words. So it's that's what it is. That's what storytelling is all about. You can tell it in 5 words and you can tell it in 50,000 words. So yeah, so that's what alternative mythology is really about. In the case of Bharat, it basically again when we look at the Ramayana, we constantly talk about the fact that the Ramayana is the story of 4 brothers, Ram, Lakshman, Bharat, and Shatrughan. But the truth is that the Ramayana is really a story of only 2 brothers. It's only Ram and Lakshman. Nobody really knows, cares, or bothers about what happened to Bharat and Shatrughan during the 14 years of Ram's exile.
True.
And I kind of found it very fascinating that the whole Ramayana happens because of Bharat. I
Right.
mean, if Keiki hadn't wanted her son to become king, the Ramayana would never have happened in many ways, right? So here's a character who is, in many ways, is the reason why the Ramayana happens, and the whole Vanvas and the Sita Haran and the killing of Ravan and all of that, and nobody even bothers about this guy. So I was very fascinated about Bharat as a character, and so I did not want to do a retelling of the Ramayana. I don't want to do a retelling of the Mahabharata because these are stories that have been told so many times. I don't think there's anything new I can bring to the telling of the Ramayana. So what I can do is I can tell something new, which is a spin-off of the Ramayana, which is the story of Bharat. And that is a story that has never been told. So to me, that is what was exciting. The fact that here's I get an opportunity to tell the story of the man who was king of Ayodhya, the reluctant king of Ayodhya, and what did he have to go through to protect his the word that he'd given Ram. He told Ram that 14 years later, when you come back, Ayodhya will be standing and waiting for you. What does he do to protect that word, and how does he defend that kingdom from all kinds of trials and tribulations? And it's all fiction, of course, but yeah, that's the whole fun of it. So that's really what alternative mythology is, trying and looking at mythological stories from a slightly different perspective, rather than just telling them the way we've always known them told.
So, what I enjoy about reading about your books is that there's a lot of storytelling, as you said, of course, a lot of fiction involved in this, but there are a lot of historical elements also with mythology, which makes it very interesting. It grabs your attention, it ensures that the reader is in it from the first word till the last word. So, how do you balance these two aspects to create this kind of narrative where you are gripping the reader's attention?
Yeah, I think the whole idea is that I love history. I also love fantasy and mythology. So that space of the fantastical and the realistic side of history. So I try and marry them as far as possible. Uh, so, for example, if one were to take the Warlord of Ayodhya, now the story is set in Ayodhya and Mathura. That's really where the entire story is set. Kosala and Chedi and Anga, all of that. So one of the things, as I was kind of exploring the story and it's the backdrop of the story, I one of the things I wanted to do was, because it's the story of Bharat, I wanted to have two nobles trying to control Bharat, because that's usually what happens. Whenever there is a vacuum in power vacuum, what happens is people try and exploit this to their own advantage. People internally, people externally, all of that. So I knew for a fact that I wanted two rival nobles who want to control Bharat and get them to, they are the classic kingmakers. So one of the things was that I said that, okay, they're nobles, but what do they do? You know, uh, yeah. So I said, okay, what about trying to give them a historical context? So I said, okay, I'll make them traders. They are nobles who have become big and rich and powerful on trade. But then I said, oh, trade of what? And then I kept going back and reading a lot, and I realized that the two of the most interesting things that came out of the subcontinent at that period of time was actually sugar and indigo. So indigo, the dye, and sugar, both in many ways came out of the Gangetic belt. Okay. So I just said that, okay, let me use the history of that idea and make one noble man. He basically is into the sugar business, and the other nobleman is into indigo business. So it's just that using a lot of these kind of historical using historical backgrounds and historical ideas to kind of make it sound more realistic. I think it's just that, because the whole idea is to how do you make the story as believable as possible. So the idea is, if you make the so for example, one of the reasons why I know for a fact that a lot of people love Bharat is not only does he have this fantastic close relationship with his son Taksha, he's also got a very interesting relationship with a dog. And that is something that you don't usually see. Like in our mythology, we don't actually have a lot of human. You've got humans and horses, but you don't have a human and a dog relationship. You don't get to see that much. So I thought that it would be a very interesting way of bringing Bharat. How do you kind of humanize that character? All we have known about Bharat all along is he's Ram's beautiful brother. How do I make him more human? So suddenly he rescues this dog from the fire, and he brings this dog, but he can't keep the dog in the palace. So he's got to keep it in the stables. So, it just shows what the power dynamics are, what hierarchies are, what are the kind of palace rules, all those kind of things. So I think that's really what, makes it fun, makes it enjoyable. Yeah, so it's just that.
That I completely agree that the characters, they feel very relatable when you read about them like this, because otherwise we have known versions of them where we kind of feel alienated, like they are superhumans and we are humans. But with these factors added to their stories, we feel a connection with them, and I think that's what
Right,
makes it
right.
more relatable and more enjoyable when you read it.
Exactly, which is also why try to build in as much of the historical concept,
Yeah.
context, all of that, so that it doesn't feel just pure fantasy. It starts feeling this could be real. Maybe this did happen.
Yeah,
That's really the space.
true. Uh, so, Shatrujit, from writing articles to novels to movies and web shows, so what are the key differences and challenges between these mediums?
Um, I think when the big thing for me when I quit journalism to start writing fiction. Uh, I was in journalism for 10 years, and I've written, I don't know how many stories, hundreds, thousands of stories. But nothing prepared me for the amount of work it takes to write a book. To be very honest with you, when I set out to write Karachi Deception, I thought I'd be done in a month. I was not prepared for the fact that, it took me 7 months to write that book. And of course, it was also a very bloated book that I had written. My first draft was 150,000 words. So that was an incredibly large book, which, almost it was knocked down by almost about, 40% we knocked down. So what finally ended up, we've got it at around some 90,000 or so. So yeah, I lost about 60,000 words. But what I'm trying to get at is that, in journalism, you write a story is anywhere from, say, 1,000 words to 5,000 words. Never is a story more than 5,000 words long, at least in the journalism that I practice. Now there is, the more long format journalism. You can have 10, 12,000 words also, but still it's not a novel. So I think that's the big difference. The fact that it takes so long to write a novel, and that's one huge difference between journalism and writing, novels. The other huge difference is that it takes up so much of your uh, not just time, it takes up so much of your bandwidth, because a story requires so much of thinking in terms of, the detailing, the plotting, the characters, all of that. So in journalism, you don't need to do any of that. In journalism, you're basically playing with facts, and you just, use facts to construct a good story. In writing fiction, you are creating everything ground up from a blank page. You page after page after page, you just fill. So it requires so much of bandwidth, emotional, mental bandwidth. That's something that I was never prepared for. It took me a long time to get there. That's, I think, the huge difference between writing novels and uh, writing stories for journalism. The big difference that I find between writing for shows and web shows and writing for novels is, and I kind of keep saying this quite often, that the novel is the finished product, is the final product. The story or screenplay is the starting point of a project. So when I write a novel, and once I've finished writing a novel, that novel is what is going to be consumed by readers. You, whoever it is, they will read. That is the end product. When I finish writing a screenplay, that is where the process of creating a movie starts, where everyone builds on that, from the director to the editor to the music director to actors to cameramen. Everyone builds on that written document. So the book is the final point. The manuscript is the starting point. So the manuscript is actually a roadmap. It's it's never the finished product. So very often the finished product might look very different from the manuscript, but that's because the manuscript allows you to build on it. So I think that's really what it is. Um, it's writing a novel is a lot more organic. It feels more rooted. I find it more granular in that sense. I wouldn't say organic. I think even all stories are organic in that sense, but it's more granular. It's more, like every word matters and every sentence matters. Uh, you want you want to say things exactly the way they are, in the hope that the reader is going to take out the meaning exactly the way you meant it. Uh, in a manuscript, it's not like that. You can describe a sunset whatever way you want. What's going to get shot is a sunset that gets shot. And the two sunsets might not even look the same. So it doesn't matter. I think the idea of a manuscript, as I've said, is to give people an idea of what can be, not what is. The novel is saying this is what is. The manuscript is this is what it can be. Now take this and later. So I think that's really what it is. Uh, I I find all three very enjoyable. I don't write journalism anymore. I don't work in journalism anymore. I used to enjoy doing that. Now I don't. But between writing books and writing for shows, movies, yeah, they're all good fun. It's all telling stories. So that's the
Yeah.
joy.
That's a very beautiful way to put it. In the end of the day, it's all about stories. Like, even if you look at movies, you look at shows, it's all about the stories that we are talking about.
Correct.
We come to a very interesting question, which I feel is very important. From a time when Indian mythology was a hard sell, making publishers hesitant to pick it up, to now when mythology writers are ruling the roost, What are your thoughts on this significant shift in perspective? And what do you think the future holds for mythology writers?
Uh, so first of all, let me clarify, I am not a mythology writer. Uh, I usually get invited to, literary events, literary festivals, all of that in the capacity of being a mythological storyteller. And that's only by the dint of the fact that, 6 out of my 7 books are based on
Yeah.
or derived from mythology. But the truth is, I am not a mythology specialist writer. I Simply because I don't think I think there are a lot of writers out there who know their mythology far better than I do. I don't pretend to know my mythology too well. Uh, I do have a good understanding of mythology, but it's not like I'm an expert in mythology. And as I said, I do not want to be categorized as a mythological author because as or a writer of mythological stories. Because as I said, I want to go back to writing all kinds of stories, historical fiction, thrillers, fantasy, horror, all kinds of stuff I want to do. But to answer your question, I think the market for mythology has always existed in India forever. If one looks at the languages, for example, whether it's Marathi, Malayalam, Tamil, Bengali, whatever language you pick, mythological storytellings have always existed. Uh, through the 50s, 60s, 70s, you've always had mythological stories being told. It's only in English that mythological stories were not being told. And I think I really don't know why. There is this famous story about how I don't know how far it's true, but the story goes that when Amish wrote The Immortals of Meluha, and when he went and took it to publishers, English language publishers, the big names in the business, they apparently told him to get lost because there is no market for mythology in India. And of course, Amish decided not to listen to them, thankfully, and he went and self-published. And then we had this huge series, which in a way opened the gates for mythological storytelling in English in India. So just goes to tell you that publishers don't know anything. Nobody knows anything. We all pretend as if we know we have all the answers. We don't. Uh, it just so happened that the time was right for Amish and the time was right for mythological stories in English to come out. But before Amish, I think I always like to clarify that I think the author who actually set this this wheel in motion was actually Ashok Banker with his Prince of Ayodhya series. And while everyone does talk about Amish, and Amish really helped, kind of galvanize the entire thing. I think it was Ashok Banker who really, for the first time, wrote uh, a mythological story in English for contemporary Indian English readers. So I think with Ashok and Amish, and then subsequently Ashwin came in with his own kind of spin to mythology, which was more a kind of thrilleresque mythology, contemporary, but it had mythological elements and drew from mythology. So I think from that point onwards, Anand happened. Anand Neelakantan was there. Kavita Kane was there. So I think what has happened is that there was this great groundswell of authors who started writing on mythology. Today, there are lots of them myself included. There are lots of us who are writing mythological stories. It just goes to show that A, there are so many stories to tell. It also goes to show that, see, not everyone knows, although we are all from India and we, we seem to know mythological stories, we don't necessarily have an in-depth understanding of the finer details of a lot of mythology. So I think that's really where a lot of the newer storytellers, that's the opportunity that they see, and that's I think what they're doing. They're telling mythological stories, and there's a huge uh, reader segment that exists that wants to know these stories and derives joy out of reading these stories. So I think that's really it's kind of it's a sweet spot. We've got authors who are creating these stories and readers. So I think it's nice that we have this moment here. What the future would be, it's a little hard to say. I don't know because everything runs its course and everything is cyclic. So sometimes, some things last for some time, and then all of a sudden, the thing just goes out of fashion, and then people are kind of tired of reading that or tired of watching it or whatever it is. So I don't know how long it will last, but I think good stories will continue being told. I think good stories will continue being told in any genre. So for a time, there was a time when people said the Western idea in as the Western movie was dead. But I think over the last maybe 8 to 10 years, the Western has kind of come back. And now, you've got shows on Westerns, you've got movies, you've got neo Westerns. And so I think the Western is back in some ways. So I think it's all about that. Fantasy as a segment had almost died. But then fortunately, J.K. Rowling happened. And then, uh, I think it's fantasy has kind of come back today. And now fantasy is big again. So I think it's just that. All we need is a good storyteller to kind of, just kindle the fire, and we have it going again.
You know, what you said just reminds me of an interview, a very old interview of the actress Pooja Bhatt that I had seen recently, where
Okay.
somebody just said that, we just don't know what the audience wants. So she's like, this was what my father said a decade ago. This is what we say now, and this was what somebody will say after a decade. So technically, we will never know what the audiences want. It's always a combination of trial and error where we try to give them something, it works, and there is a very thin line where we don't try to overdo it, and it works with them.
Absolutely, absolutely. No, in fact, there's this very famous. He was a Hollywood writer, William Golding. Uh, he had this. He has this book called The Adventures of the Screen Trade. So one of the first things that he says that in Hollywood nobody knows anything. That's what he sets out by saying, that you go and have a conversation in Hollywood, everyone is full of information and knowledge and yarn and all of that. But the truth is, nobody knows anything. There's this very famous story about Casablanca. I don't know if you know it. I'll just take a minute to kind of tell you about
Sure.
Casablanca. So Casablanca, like this mega hit movie from the
Yeah.
19 whatever 60s or whatever it was. So Casablanca, when it was being made, nobody in the crew really thought that this movie is ever going to go and become the kind of iconic movie that it did become. In fact, the truth is the movie was not even, I think, called Casablanca. The name of the movie was at that point in time something else
Okay.
while it was being shot. And around the same time, there was another movie, I think it was called Tripoli or something like that. Another movie based around Second World War, black and white. That movie became a kind of middling hit.
Mm-hmm.
So that was based, I think it was called Tripoli, or was it called, I don't know, Algiers or something it was called. So the crew at Casablanca said, there's that movie that has become a middling hit based around the Second World War. They gave it the name of a city. So let's also name our movie Casablanca. So it's like even the naming of the movie was so random. Okay, just because it happens in Casablanca. So there's no thinking. And then they release it, and this movie just becomes this phenomenon. So that's where it is. Like sometimes, you are not, you have very low expectations, and then it lands like it's a supernova. And sometimes you've got such high expectations, and it just it's a dud. So yeah, that's the nature of this business where we are in, the storytelling business. There is no there is no formula. There is no way of saying this is what is going to work. This will be a hit. This will not be a hit. All you're doing is you're hedging your bets, and you're hoping that what you have bet on will work. You're hoping that it will work. You're praying that it will work. You're hoping that it will become a mega success. That's all there is to it.
Yeah, very true. So
You
that,
know,
yeah,
it's very similar even in, for example, here in Bollywood.
yeah.
So there was a time in this, you had this movie Drishyam, which had kind of become a big hit. So you would go to you'd go for any meeting with a producer or a studio. The first question will be, do you have something like Drishyam? Do you have an idea like Drishyam? And you're like, uh, if you start work on an idea like Drishyam now, it is going to take 3 years for that movie to come out. By then, the audience has moved on. They don't want Drishyam. They have moved on to
True.
something else. And now you come out with Drishyam, they're not interested. So it's impossible to second guess what audiences would like, what readers would like. Uh, I think the best you can do is just write for yourself. Write a story which you think is likely to work and pray.
I think that that also implies to a lot of aspiring writers, because when Chetan Bhagat and Ravinder Singh had become a national phenomenon, you could hear almost every second aspiring writer say, "I want to be the next Chetan Bhagat." So
Correct.
there's a lot that goes on, and why would you want a second Chetan Bhagat when you already have one and who's an original, who's unique in his own writing, in his marketing, in everything that that person does. There's a lot that went behind making that brand there. And you don't
Correct.
know if of a second Chetan Bhagat would sell as much as a first Chetan Bhagat sold.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So I think, yeah, definitely the idea is, uh, while it's nice to be inspired by someone, I think ultimately you have to figure out your own space,
Yeah.
your own voice, your own stories, your own readers. You might not even appeal to Chetan Bhagat's readers. Like, for example, I probably don't appeal to
Yeah.
Chetan Bhagat's
True.
readers.
True.
And that's okay. I know the Chetan Bhagat's readers are so many more in number, but it's just that that's not the kind of story I want to tell. I'm probably capable of telling either. It's just I want to tell the kind of stories I want to tell, and if that means I get only a fraction of his readers, so be it. But if I were to try and pretend to be Chetan Bhagat, I'm definitely not going to get his readers, and I'm not going to get those readers who read me today because they are not interested in reading that version of me. They are interested in reading the version of me that I am today writing. So it's just that.
And as you rightly said, a good story is always going to be the hero. That's a good storytelling is always going to be the thing that is going to work, and that
Correct,
should be the one that is selling actually.
correct, 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 correct.
So that brings us to the last question, Shatrujit. As someone who tells stories across media like books, web shows, movies, how do you see the landscape of content creation evolving in today's digital age? And how has this influenced your approach to storytelling?
This it's actually fascinating because today I was having this conversation with someone else. Maybe about 4 5 months ago, and like they were asking me that like how do you again see new any tips for new writers and all of that. So I was like, "E- if we all stopped writing right at this moment, all writers under the sun stopped writing, there is enough content available to feed our need for entertainment curiosity for the next 50 years. Between movies, shows, TV shows, web shows, books, comics, graphic novels, video games, there is enough content. So the fact is that there's just so much content that we keep creating. Okay. Simply because we all believe that, yeah, there is so much of content, but my story is so much better and so much different from everything that has already been created. So I think as long as all of us, writers, creators, storytellers, as long as we keep believing that the one story that we have inside us needs to be told because it is the single most unique story out there, we will keep creating content. And that content somehow or the other is going to get consumed
Right.
uh, somehow or the other. So I think today we are so spoiled for choice when it comes to content. Um, you know, 40 years ago, people talk about how the reading habit has declined. It's true because 30, 40 years ago, I think reading was the cheapest form of entertainment. Otherwise, you would at the most, you would, go and watch a weekend movie. That's it. Today, there is just so much of content that's available, curated, paid, unpaid. You can just sit on, Instagram and just watch reels for the next 2 hours, dog videos. You can just do that and be entertained. So there is just so much content out there. I think it's also a challenge because there is so much content that's available. How do you make your content? I think the biggest challenge is going to be how do you get people to sample your content?
Yeah. Very true.
Because that is the biggest challenge. How do I get Namrata to read at least 3 chapters of my book so that she feels excited and says, okay, this is something I want to read. I know there are hundreds of or thousands of readers out there, who have never even heard about my books. Okay. And I believe that probably at least anywhere from 10 to 30% of them, if they sampled my book, would read and like it. How do I reach out to them is my biggest challenge. I don't know. And I think this is a challenge for all content creators. So this is going to be the challenge. The content space is all going to be how do you get people to sample? How do you get them hooked? How do you just give them enough? How, where? I think that's going to be the challenge because content is what we are creating. Uh, the content that gets watched and read is the content that is going to get sampled, and sampling is going to be everything. So I really believe, marketing is going to become more and more important. Uh, I I believe that uh, word of mouth. Yes, I think ultimately word of mouth is so critical in this line of business because no matter how much of fluff and padding you might do in terms of the kind of spin you give stories and all of that, ultimately it's when people recommend books and movies and shows and content to other people that's how it gets viral. So how do you create stories that, as I said, two things. One is how do you get people to sample? The other is how do you create stories which are just so good that once that sampling happens, then it just becomes viral.
Yeah.
It's like, say, you take Squid Game, right? You know that it just came out of nowhere from Korea. It just came out of nowhere, and then everyone is talking about Squid Game. So how do you? They got somebody to sample it, and that somebody was so bowled over that they just could not stop talking about it, and then that becomes your sampling, right? So
True.
it's just that how do you get people to do that? So it's we just have to create better and better content and figure out better and better ways of getting people to sample that content. Sounds very easy. I don't know how we're going to do
No,
that.
because this. I think this also happened in the case of Money Heist. Like it just came from
Yes,
nowhere, and the
absolutely,
languages it went on to be dubbed into or promoted, and that song Bela Ciao. I mean, everybody knew it,
absolutely,
irrespective of the
absolutely.
pronunciation and everything.
Absolutely, absolutely. I think that's what it is. It's about how do you kind of create those stories which, which are
Yeah,
able to leap across cultures, leap across geographies, leap across, uh, behavioral patterns, sociological factors, all those things. How do you tell those broad, big, universal stories? Yeah, big challenge, but I think that's where we have to go, Abhin.
and the biggest battle I believe is that we are all dealing with a lot of decreasing attention span. Trying to focus on something.
You know,
It's
I somehow at one level I do agree, but I also kind of disagree. We wait season after season after season for Game of Thrones. There is no decline of attention there. We wait season after season for Squid Games. We wait season after season for Peaky Blinders. We wait season after season for Umbrella Academy. Season after season, we have done Lord of the Rings. We have done, what is that, Ring of Power. Now we have got the War of Rohirrim. We've got, we are doing spin-offs, we are doing derivatives, and as long as you've got content is good, I don't think anyone has a problem with attention.
mm,
Attention wavers when you have got content which is not engaging enough. When you've got good engaging content, I don't think anyone cares. They will sit and watch. People say that nobody watches, more than 20 minutes of a show. They watch back to back 8 episodes of Game of Thrones, which is about 8 hours of programming. Overnight you people sit and watch. There is no attention span. Nobody has a problem with that. So I think it's just that we have to kind of just realize that uh, attention spans waver and wander when things are when what we are looking at is not engaging. If it is engaging enough, we don't have to worry.
okay. So if you had to recommend shows, top three shows for someone to watch right now,
Oh,
what would you do?
that's very difficult. Okay, that's very difficult, but because there are just so many good shows out there. But top three, let me very very quickly, shows that I have liked a lot.
Yeah, your
So
personal
there is
favorites.
this yeah, there's this show on Apple TV called Blackbird.
Okay.
Uh, Blackbird on Apple TV. I completely loved it. It's outstanding. It's based on a book. It's based on a real life story. It's based on a book. It's outstanding. There is another great show which is on Netflix called Cleo. It's a
Mm-hmm.
German show. Very nice show. I completely enjoyed it. Thoroughly enjoyed watching it. Cleo was great fun. Um, what else did I watch recently, which I've completely enjoyed? Uh, just trying to figure out. There's another one again. I think this is on Netflix. Strangely, this is also a German show. It's called The Woman of the Dead.
Okay.
The Woman of the Dead. It's basically it's also a thriller. So all three actually are thrillers, but quite different from one another in different ways. These are just three that have just kind of come my head top of mind. Not to say that they're the only good shows that are on. I mean, I'm sure if I had another 10 minutes, I'll be able to name a few more. But these are some shows that I've really enjoyed. Yeah, these are good shows. I've quite
Thank you.
enjoyed.
Thank you for this recommendation. So, uh, do you have any closing thoughts as we wrap this conversation? Anything to share for the viewers?
Nothing. I must also say, I just read a book recently. I read two books recently, which I have thoroughly enjoyed. So, which is why I'll just kind of share that with you and for those who kind of watch and like to read. So, one
Absolutely.
is called 4 and 20 Blackbirds. 4 and 20 Blackbirds. It's written by this guy, Godfrey. I've forgotten his name. He's an Anglo-Indian. The book is phenomenal. It's again based on real life. It's just post-independence. And it's set in 1948, and it's the story of a group of Englishmen. They are basically, when India's got its independence, and they're a group of Englishmen who are living in Bombay, and
Right.
they don't know what to do. They don't know whether, do they want to stay back in India, or do they want to go abroad? And then what they do is that they just go out, off Bombay. There's a place called Cross Island. They go and set up a smuggling operation out of Cross Island.
Wow.
And it's the story of these English smugglers who set up a smuggling operation out of Cross Island, which is, some half a kilometer out of Bombay in the sea.
Interesting.
And yeah, and it's a fascinating story. It's great fun. So I have enjoyed 4 and 20 Blackbirds. A lot of fun. Good book. I really enjoyed it. The other book that I'd recommend is How to Sell a Haunted House by Grady Hendrix. Good fun. I quite enjoyed it. Recent times, it's a good fun read. It's horror, but it's well written and it's good fun. It's good fun. I don't want to reveal more, but it's the story of a woman who has to go back to her parents have died in a car accident, so
Mhm.
she has to go back and she's got to go back to the house where she was born and brought up. But there are disturbing things in that house, and that's really what it is. And so it's good, but good fun. So yeah, so just two books as well. So,
Oh, that's great. That's great. I'll add all the links to your work, to the books and the shows that you've recommended in the description. I'll also share all
sure.
your social media links. Thank you so much for this. It was brilliant talking to you.
Thank you so much, Namrata. As usual, it's always a pleasure dealing with you, working with you on, and you have so much passion for stories and storytelling and books in particular. So thank you so much. I mean, it's people like you who actually keep us going, readers like you. So yeah, thanks a lot.
Thank you so much.